Hey everybody, JRed here. What are some of the most important upgrades in Age of Empires 2? You obviously have your upgrades that advance you to the next stage, and of course you have upgrades that further along the unit in its line of research. So example, archers become crossbowmen, and cavaliers become paladins. However, one upgrade that I think doesn't get talked about as much as it should get talked about is Siege Engineers. This upgrade gives siege weapons plus 20% attack versus buildings, and it gives all the ranged siege weapons plus 1 range. This is an incredibly powerful upgrade that drastically improves the performance of your siege weapons, and in this video I am going to examine it. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to start by looking at how the range of this technology affects the performance of Onagers, Bombard cannons, Trebuchets, and Scorpions. I am then going to look into how the damage improvement of this technology affects the performance of capped and siege rams. I'm not going to be looking at the Castle Age units because I'm not familiar with these, so let's start by looking at how this technology affects the range of Onagers. Now, a normal Onager has a range of 8, and after Siege Engineers it has a range of 9. However, the Onager also has another upgrade, which is the Siege Onager. A fun fact is that if you have a Siege Onager, and you're not the Malians, you will have Siege Engineers. And as such, I'm not going to look at how a Siege Onager without Siege Engineers compares to an Onager with Siege Engineers. I do, however, want to show you how important it is to have some of these upgrades. Before I show you my illustrations, I want to point out that the Siege Onager upgrade increases HP, attack, and armor, so therefore it does increase its survivability and its damage. However, having extra range will still help both survivability and damage dealt. The first thing I would like to show you is the actual range of these units. On the left, you can see that an Onager has a range of 8, an Onager with Siege Engineers has 1 more range, but you can also see that a Siege Onager has the same range as an Onager with Siege Engineers if both of those units have the Siege Engineers upgrade. You can also see that the Koreans get 10 range in the HD expansions and 11 range in Age of Conquerors because of their various bonuses that give them extra range. Now, if you do a test where you line up all the Onagers on the same line and you have elite longbowmen several tiles away, you'll see that the Korean Siege Onagers don't have to move very far in order to attack, but the generic Onager without Siege Engineers has to move a large distance. You can see that this shows that, in some situations, the Onagers will not be able to get a shot off, but the Siege Onagers will. And this shows the importance of the Siege Onager upgrade. However, if you change the numbers of the elite longbowmen, you can see that the ones with Siege Engineers do get a shot off, the ones without Siege Engineers don't get a shot off, and that the Korean Siege Onager in Age of Conquerors actually gets 2 shots off. I obviously cannot do illustrations to really show you the full impact of Siege Engineers and the Siege Onager upgrades, however, this does come close. Next, I want to see how Siege Engineers affects the range of Bombard cannons and Trebuchets. Bombard cannons without Siege Engineers have 12 range, but they have 13 range when they have Siege Engineers. Turk Bombard cannons do not have Siege Engineers, but they do have their artillery bonus, which gives them 2 extra range, meaning they have more range than any of the other Bombard cannons. Trebuchets have 16 range, and with Siege Engineers, they have 17 range. This makes Bombard cannons basically better at sniping Trebuchets and Onagers by a little bit, and it does help a whole lot when going up against Korean Onagers. However, in most games, having this extra range won't be that much of a deal because both of these units already have quite a high range. Having said that, this technology is essential on choke points that are common in Michi or Black Forest maps, because this technology can mean the difference between your units being in or out of range of your opponent's armies. This is very noticeable when your trebuchets do not have that extra range that your opponent's trebuchets have, which can make Trebu Wars on Black Forest a nightmare. Now, when I looked at how Siege Engineers affects the damage dealt of the Bombard cannons and trebuchets, I tested them against a fully upgraded castle, so that way that would show the biggest differences that there are. A Bombard cannon takes 33 shots to kill a fully upgraded castle while dealing 216 damage per shot. A Bombard cannon with Siege Engineers does 40 more damage per shot and takes 5 less hits to kill at 28. A Trebuchet does 424 damage per shot and only takes 17 hits to kill, and a Trebuchet with Siege Engineers deals 474 damage, taking 15 hits to kill. Now, these differences of 5 hits to kill and 2 hits to kill at first don't sound like that big of a deal, and in many situations they won't be. However, keep in mind that 8 Bombard cannons with Siege Engineers can reliably 4-shot a fully upgraded castle. However, it will take 5 volleys to do it if they do not have Siege Engineers. If you have 5 trebuchets, you can take down a castle in only 3 volleys if you do have Siege Engineers, but you'll need 4 volleys if you don't have Siege Engineers. While this oftentimes won't have that big of an effect on the outcome of a game, every now and then it will be important, so it's a good thing to keep that in mind. Moving on, when you look at the Heavy Scorpion, the first thing to note is that if you're in a post-Imperial Age, you're probably not going to use a generic Scorpion anyways, so we don't have to look at that unit. The second thing that we'll have to note is that the Scorpion's projectile actually damages multiple units in a straight line, and I think that this affects the total outcome and importance of Siege Engineers. A Heavy Scorpion has 7 range and 8 range after Siege Engineers. However, their Scorpion projectile actually goes 3 tiles further than that, meaning without Siege Engineers it goes 10, and with it goes 11. However, when you try to attack something else that is further than the displayed range, your Scorpion has to actually move into that range. Combine this with the fact that Scorpions have a minimum range of 2, that makes it very difficult to determine the importance of Siege Engineers for them. I think that the extra range of Siege Engineers is probably very important for the Scorpion, because it means that they can attack the enemies earlier, and you have to remember that if they're attacking an enemy who's charging at you and you get an extra shot off because you fired a little bit earlier, you're not getting 17 extra damage, you're actually getting 17 extra damage, and any of the extra damage you'll get from when your projectile hits multiple units. However, this feature of pass-through damage, when combined with the slowness of the Scorpion, means that it doesn't feel that bad to take close engagements anyways. So I would say that Siege Engineers does help Scorpions a lot, but they're still very usable without them. Now, when you look at how Siege Engineers affect Siege Rams, you can't look at range because it does not change their range at all, fortunately. However, it does drastically increase the damage dealt. But a question that I have is, which is better? A Siege Ram without Siege Engineers, or a Capped Ram with Siege Engineers? Now, a Siege Ram has 70 more HP, it has 50 more attack versus buildings, and 15 more versus siege weapons. It also has a little bit more armor and a higher blast radius, and a slightly higher speed. However, for this calculation, I'm mainly going to look at the attack versus buildings, because this is what we're trying to concentrate about. I tested both Capped Rams and Siege Rams, both with and without Siege Engineers. I tested them against first a fully upgraded stable, which has 2,541 HP, along with some armor that Masonry and Architecture give them. Now, civilizations that have capped RAM without siege engineers are only the Goths, Italians, and Malians. So the results from this test probably aren't that important, but I'll include them anyway. Capped rams with siege engineers are belonging to the Berbers, Britons, Burmese, Franks, Indians, Japanese, Koreans, Magyars, Malay, Portuguese, Teutons, and the Vietnamese, which is quite a lot of civilizations. There are also a good deal of civilizations that have siege ram, but not siege engineers, such as the Byzantines, Chinese, Huns, Mayans, Persians, Spanish, and the Turks. And finally, the civilizations that have fully upgraded siege rams with siege engineers are the Aztecs, Celts, Ethiopians, Incas, Khmer, Mongols, Saracens, Slavs, and the Vikings. Now, I'd just like to pause this video to appreciate the fact of something that has rarely occurred. The Vikings actually have a good unit. However, because I have a personal bias against the Vikings, I'm going to pretend that their siege rams are just as bad as capped rams without siege engineers. Sorry, my friendly little berserkers, but you gotta admit, your civ sucks. A capped ram without siege engineers did 144 damage per shot, meaning it took 18 hits to kill. A capped ram with siege engineers did 30 more damage per shot, taking 3 less hits to kill. A siege ram without siege engineers actually took 194 damage per shot, which is higher than the capped ram with siege engineers, and it did 14 hits to kill, which is actually not that much less than the capped ram with siege engineers. And finally, a siege ram with siege engineers far outperformed all the others at 234 damage per shot with 11 hits to kill. What really surprised me was that the capped ram with siege engineers was almost as good as the siege ram without siege engineers. And in all honesty, one more attack isn't that much of a big deal. However, this is against a building that has a relatively low HP. A fully upgraded castle has 7,028 HP, as well as some armor. A capped ram without siege engineers did only 136 damage and took a whopping 52 hits to kill. A capped ram with siege engineers was a vast improvement on this, with 166 damage per shot and taking only 43 hits to kill. Siege rams without siege engineers did a little bit better at 186 damage per shot with 38 hits to kill, and of course the siege ram with siege engineers did the best at 226 damage per shot and 32 hits to kill. Now, my tests cannot account for the extra HP or armor that you get after the siege ram upgrade, but I think that it's still safe to say that when you're attacking buildings that are not castles, the capped ram with siege engineers will do just fine. The siege ram upgrade is more important when you're attacking castles because of the drastic increase that it will give you. However, versus a capped ram against non-castle buildings, it's not that big of a deal. Now, I'm not going to look at how this affects petards because other people have already done videos on this, and I would just be repeating what other people have already said very well. I would say that the Siege Engineers upgrade is a very important upgrade because it helps all of the Siege Workshop units. It gives rams extra damage, it gives Bombard cannons, Trebuchets, and Onagers, Scorpions extra range, and it is more important than any one siege upgrade. What I mean by this is that if I had a choice between two identical siege workshops, except one siege workshop might have siege ram but not siege engineers, and the other workshop might have siege engineers but not siege ram, I would probably have to choose the latter because siege engineers drastically increases the performance of all of the siege weapons. Well, that's all for this video, guys. It's a really important upgrade, and I really have been wanting to make a video to cover it for quite a long time. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you have found this useful. See you later. Bye.